We are back. Senators, Twins, past, present, and future. My name is Ralph Tyko. I'm with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we have Edition 2. George Case III and Ron Rabinowvitz the first are our co-hosts, and George is with us. Ron is on his way. How are you, sir?
I'm just fine. Thank you very much, Ralph. I enjoyed talking to you last week and looking forward to this week.
Oh, I am too. I'm planning to make a go of this thing because the senator history is so rich, and you guys are the perfect couple for this for a number of reasons. George, as some of the audience probably doesn't know, that your dad was a major league outfielder pre-war and during the war in World War II. One thing I'm very proud of, baseball did not shut down during the war. Can you tell us, George, how close baseball came to shutting down during the war, and what saved it, and what significance? Obviously, the team, the Senators, were playing in Washington. And,
Ralph, I think I can elaborate on that. It was a very interesting time. World War II obviously was an area and an era that was very much in the forefront of everyone's mind in this country, and baseball was part of that, and yet it was an American institution. And the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had always been, a great baseball fan himself. But there was a question in 1942 whether the game would continue, and President Roosevelt issued his letter to Judge Landis. It's become known as the Green Light Letter, when he felt in the best interest of the country was for baseball to continue. So they came very close, because if Roosevelt had decided the other way, baseball would shut down. The stipulation of the agreement, though, was that any player who was declared 4F, and my dad was one of those declared 4F, would work in a defense industry job in the off season. So my dad worked in an aircraft plant in Trenton, New Jersey, all the while he was playing during the baseball season, Major League Baseball. So it was a time when many Major League players went into the service, and the level of Major League Baseball certainly declined, but the game still went on, and it was a morale boost, because the servicemen in foreign lands would always want to know how their ball club was doing and how the players were doing, and it was an interesting time for Major League Baseball. My dad was part of it, played, and was fortunate that he was able to contribute whatever he could to the war effort by at least providing a morale boost to the servicemen. And Griffith Stadium, with Mr. Griffith, always had a policy of allowing any serviceman in uniform during the World War II years free admittance to the ballpark.
Nice. That's nice. The more I hear about this gentleman, the more I really like him, other than the idea that there weren't many blacks that the Senators brought up in those early years after Jackie. And we kind of touched on that last week. What were his feelings personally about blacks in baseball?
Well, I think, Ralph, my dad was, the color of the skin did not matter to him.
No, of course, not your dad. I'm talking about Griffith.
Oh, Mr. Griffith. Well, that situation was one thing. I think that, you can look at it both sides of the fence if you want. He did not have a lot of black players, obviously, but he did, provide baseball opportunities for a lot of the Cubans, as we talked about last week. And,
right.
It was also maybe a sign of the times. I mean, the fact that Major League Baseball did not integrate until Jackie Robinson in 1947, I don't think you can really, blame that in any way on Mr. Griffith. It was just the way unfortunately, the country was at the time. And Mr. Griffith was certainly, part of the United States. That's the thinking at the time. But I don't think he harbored any prejudice against blacks. I just think it was the timing of it. And the fact that, it took until 1947 until Jackie was able to break the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Okay. If you could sum it up, could you just say that he was a man of his times?
Absolutely. I think so.
Else? He wasn't one of those owners that was against integration.
I never heard Ralph, I never heard my dad say that at all. And
okay.
I personally, I was only a little boy, but I met Mr. Griffith, and he was a wonderful, kindly gentleman. And his sole source of income, was the fact of the ball club. And, the Homestead Grays, as you may or may not be aware, were a tenant of the Washington Senators because they shared Griffith Stadium. So all those great black players, Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell and Buck Leonard, I mean, they all played at Griffith Stadium, but the ball club itself was a tenant, and it was an income source for Mr. Griffith. And so, he had an opportunity certainly to sign some of those great players. Josh Gibson would have been a tremendous asset to the ball club, but he didn't, and I don't think it was racially motivated. I think it was economically motivated.
Oh, yeah, because when that industry died, it took a lot with them. It took the black press. A lot of the black press died. When Negro League teams folded. And
yes, you're right. I mean, you'll see that. I mean, not too long after Jackie, Major League Baseball integrated, I think it was only a matter of a few years later, Negro League Baseball, disappeared.
Right. And that was one of the number one industries in the country at that time for blacks. When we say Negro, we're aware that it's black or African American, but that's what it was called at that time.
Yes, it was. And I've had people criticize me for using that phrase, and I said, well, you can be revisionist or whatever you want to call it, but baseball back then, it was called Negro League Baseball.
Right, and I didn't want anybody to get the wrong impression listening to this, like, what are we, a couple of crackers from 1941? But no, and it was called Negro League. I'm wondering if Ron is on the air listening to us, like you did last week listening to Ron and I. He's not here yet. So I'm going to broach a subject that I think needs broaching. Every ball club has retired numbers, and I talked to a fellow yesterday named Dan Schlossberg. I don't know if you know the author Dan Schlossberg.
Yes, I do.
He is absolutely prolific. He just finished his 38th book, and it's called The Baseball Bible. And the new Baseball Bible, Notes, Nuggets, Lists, and Legends from Our National Pastime. It's a work of art, and I highly recommend it, but I'm using it now on page 308, he's got a list in the book of all the numbers who have been retired by every major league team. And briefly we chatted about this, Dan and I told him that it was, to me, to a fan, more of an honor in a way because of voting being so subjective and all what's going on about Rose and Clemens and Bonds and Shoeless Joe Jackson not being in, all of this, it's more subjective than the Hall of Fame, the numbers that are retired. They're retired because of a certain love that the city has, whatever city it is, for their players. Just more so than just you can be elected to the Hall of Fame and not really loved. Your number will probably be retired by the franchise, but sometimes reluctantly, even though you're elected. But the list of folks who are retired are very impressive with all teams. No exception.
I happen to agree with you, Ralph. It is a situation where you see all those retired numbers, and I, you mentioned Dan Schlossberg. I happen to know Dan. I have one of his books, The 300 Club. He also wrote a book about umpires with Al Clark, who is a personal friend of mine who's from Trenton, New Jersey. So I'm very much aware of that, and I'm also aware of the retired number and the Hall of Fame controversy, and I understand it. Retired numbers are certainly a very, very highly thought of situation. If you're a player and you've played in a certain city and you've had your number retired, that's a great honor.
Absolutely. Now, the Twins have retired a numbers, Harmon Killebrew, among others. I don't have that short list in front of me. There's also another, I'm going to use the Giants as an example. One franchise, two teams. The New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants are both honored on the wall of not Candlestick, AT&T, or whatever they're calling it these days. Parks are renamed. Their beautiful gem of a park honors X number of players. Some of them were pre-numbered guys. For instance, the Giants honor Christy Mathewson. They honor Muggsy McGraw, who hadn't had a number, those two guys, but they put them up on the wall anyway. Point being, and it was a long way to get to it, but the Twins do not honor the Senators on their wall with anybody. Walter Johnson isn't up there. Your dad isn't up there. I think your dad would have been retired. His number would have been retired by the Senators.
Well, Ralph, I'm not sure. I've never been to Minnesota. As far as the new ballpark, and I don't know how the organization handles it. But in Washington, there is what they call the Wall of Stars, which is not really retired numbers, but those athletes who performed in one of the four major sports in Washington. My dad was included in that, so there were baseball players, football, basketball, hockey players. So it's an honor that is bestowed upon players in Washington. Now, the retired number thing is something that you're absolutely correct. There are a lot of players before 1929 or whatever it was that there were no numbers issued to their uniforms. So the great Walter Johnson would never had his number retired because he did not have a number. But in
the case of Christy Mathewson and Carl Hubbell, for instance, with the Giants, Hubbell did have a number with the New York Giants.
Right.
It's made note of by the current franchise in San Francisco. And I'd like to propose to you what you think of the idea of getting the Twins to honor the the Washington Senators,
right.
The original Washington Senators, I might add. We're going to talk about the move and what participated that.
Right.
And how the new Senators came to be the same year that the Twins left. But my proposal is that we get the Twins to honor those same players, the ones without a number. You could honor them on the wall like the other franchises do. Heidi Manouche is on the wall of the Tigers. Huey Jennings, for instance, with the Tigers. They didn't have numbers. Hornsby didn't have a number. He's on the wall with the Cardinals. Right. Again, with the precedent set of the Giants honoring the San Francisco Giants honoring the New York Giants. I think if we got the Twins to retire X number of numbers and honor X number of players, maybe have make it a poll, try to make it a nationwide poll. You ought to, because there's not one, not just your dad, but not one Washington senator has his number retired.
Well, you know what? I mean, my personal opinion, I would be very much, I approve of that kind of thing. I just think maybe it's an oversight, but the continuity, if you look at Major League Baseball, the continuity is from one city to another. I mean, the New York Giants went from New York to San Francisco. The LA Dodgers went from Brooklyn to LA. I mean, it's the same club, and it's the same area of baseball history that both should be. So if Minnesota is not honoring Walter Johnson, who played with the original Washington Senators, who was the team before moving to Minnesota, I think that's an oversight. And I would be very much in favor of it if something like that were to happen. Now, I'm not saying that my dad's number should be retired, but I certainly think somebody like a Walter Johnson, probably the greatest pitcher in Major League Baseball history, should certainly be honored by the Twins.
Right, as well as, I would say, Roy Sievers, for instance. And looking at their history, your dad is a perfect candidate. And off the top of my head, you could probably get 5 or 6 guys, make a poll out of it. You could make a nationwide poll. Maybe we can get something going and pay some homage and some respect.
You could count on my support for something like that. I mean, I would not go out and lobby for it, but I certainly would be in favor of it, and not from a selfish point of view, but I think from a historical point of view, it should be. I mean, Walter Johnson or any of those great players who played for Washington obviously never played in Minnesota because Minnesota wasn't even there. But it was the fact that that was the same franchise.
The Dodgers and the Giants.
Right. Perfect example. They kept the name Giants or they kept the name Dodgers. Obviously, Minnesota didn't. But the historical fact was that ball club originated in Washington, and those great players over the years, and many of them in the Hall of Fame, certainly were Washington players who would have ever, if the club happened to have been transferred to Minnesota during the career of Walter Johnson, then that would have been a different story. But they weren't. It was after the fact, but it was still the same franchise.
Same franchise. So let's go for that, and I'll put some thought into how we can get the word out there. And at least for Walter Johnson's sake, he should be.
Oh, absolutely.
Not taking anything away from anyone else. And the more I study your dad's career, he was not just fast; he was a good ball player, no question about that. And as publicity would have it, because New York, especially back in those days, everything centered around New York, and I contend that great franchises like the Cardinals, the Guest House Gang, and what have you, they've been shortchanged in history because of the well-storied Dodgers, Giants, and Yankees.
Ralph, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, the New York press, and the fact is that you had those 3 great franchises in major leagues and the great players. Certainly, there's been a tremendous amount of New York publicity, and I think in the situation of Washington with my dad in particular, my dad only played 10 years, and 8 of those he was healthy, but the last 2 he really wasn't healthy, and it affected his numbers, and he probably would have played a lot longer if he hadn't been injured. But the fact is that he played in
was a separated shoulder, and that's what.
Yeah, he had a separated shoulder. He also had a spinal issue from sliding. A lot of scar tissue had developed on his spine. So, and the medical, profession didn't have the advances that they have today. So, if he were playing today, they'd have probably been able to handle it. But back then, many of the players had to self-medicate themselves, and there wasn't a lot of medical advances going on. My dad did have an experimental operation by Dr. Bennett of Johns Hopkins, who also operated on Roy Sievers. I just found that out yesterday. But the fact is that, the New York press, and they had such great players, but they were the dominant, press and the dominant media organization during those years.
Right. So this will give us an opportunity to get some parity in there, in the written word, and there'd have to be a lot of publicity around that in terms of for the Twins. That would have to be you could bring back his family or whatever, if
Right.
you just want to start by retiring his number and then that kind of thing. It would.
Well, I know, Ralph, I happen to know Hank Thomas personally, and Hank is Walter Johnson's grandson, and Hank has always made the statement, well, my grandfather never played in Minnesota, which he never did, but he was a great Washington player and should certainly be honored, in my opinion, by Minnesota. His record should be there, just like they are in the Hall of Fame.
Hey, would that not be a good guest for you to cultivate? Bring him on the show.
Oh, Hank Thomas, sure. I mean, Hank has written a wonderful book about his grandfather called Walter Johnson, Baseball's Big Train, and he and I are personal friends. We've had a lot of discussions over the years about baseball in Washington.
Oh, wonderful. We could look forward to that. George, where were you in life in 1961 when expansion took place in the American League? The Angels and a new franchise, the Washington Senators. This was as crazy-making as anything I've seen in baseball. What precipitated that? I've had a hard time with that word today. It's just one show.
That's okay.
And one word, but yet 3 or 4 times. What did precipitate that move, and where were you? You were kind of an adult by then.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because that was a very interesting time for me personally. Now, in 1961, I was a sophomore at Rutgers University, and actually had played for my dad, who had been the baseball coach at Rutgers through 1960. And my father was asked by Mickey Vernon to be his third base coach, and Mickey called my father up and said, George, I just got the job of the Washington Ball Club, which is going to be one of the new teams, and we're going to need some coaches, and I'd like to have you, and I'm going to call Sid Hudson, who was another personal friend, to be his pitching coach. So, I mean, I was very much aware of when the franchise happened, and I was probably as surprised as anybody, but I also knew a little bit about the background, that the deal that Calvin Griffith had made with Major League Baseball was that he had an economic opportunity that he couldn't say no to in Minnesota, but he would not move the club to Minnesota unless Major League Baseball approved a new franchise in Washington, because he felt that, baseball and the nation's capital were synonymous with one another. So that was the inside story. And then, baseball wanted to expand to the West Coast because they had had some success with the Dodgers and the Giants. So the American League was looking to, move, and they needed a 10th team. They couldn't go from 8 to 9. They had to go from 8 to 10. So the Angels were brought in. The draft of the Angels happened to be one that the Angels went for youth. Washington went for old veterans. The first 30, 60 days of the 1961 season, Washington played 500 baseball. But then the bottom fell out. Age caught up with the players, and that was it. They finished, I think, 60, 61 and 100. And 2 years later, the Angels actually finished in 4th place in the American League and had a winning record. So The draft was one that I think Washington didn't benefit by because they went the wrong way. They should have gone with youth rather than experience. But my father was happy to be back in Washington. He was with Mickey and Sid. They were both very good friends, and they were there. They knew they didn't have a lot of talent, but they were going to do the best they could, and it was Major League Baseball, and they were happy to be back together again.
Well, one of my great memories of my family is we grew up in New York and took a train down to Washington, mainly because I was afraid of flying in those days, and in these days, and in all the days in between, I might add. But we went to Washington. I'm going to tell you a story of getting out of the airport, and the cab driver is talking. Oh, it was when we were going to the ball game. And the cab driver is talking about the 1961 New York Yankees, and he's going, they were like a machine. As he kept saying it, they're every position they click this, that, and the other. But it was funny to us because he would modify it by saying they're like a machine. They were. That was a great team.
Right.
And they came into Washington, or they and we simultaneously. Came into Washington, and I got to watch what I call the Hinton days of Washington baseball.
Chuck Hinton, yep.
Chuck Hinton. He was a good ball player.
Yes, he was.
Can you tell me a little bit about him? Because, ironically, we talked about the color line, black gentleman, and he pretty much the face of that early franchise.
I would say, Ralph, and I knew Chuck personally, and I would say he probably was the most talented player they had. He was in his prime when he was playing for the expansion team. After his playing days, Chuck was a community activist in D.C. and was a longtime baseball coach at Howard University. And the last time I met with Chuck was in 2001. We held a symposium at Howard University Hospital about the legacy of Griffith Stadium, and Chuck told me personally, he said, I'm really happy to be able to participate because I actually played at Griffith Stadium with the expansion team because they played there in '61 before the new D.C., which later became RFK Stadium, was completed.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have, as a fan, to have been there. I keep a mental list of all the ballparks that I've been to over the years, and there aren't that many, but some of them are no longer there. And
well, that's true. There are very few parks. I mean, the only two that are still being used for Major League Baseball, and again, I get on my soapbox. I think it's wrong. But the fact is that you have Wrigley and you have Fenway are the only two. Even Yankee Stadium, as great as history and the cathedral of baseball, I mean, is no longer there.
Yeah, it's been changed, totally changed.
Right.
Remodeled twice, as a matter of fact.
Right. Yes, it was. And then completely, a brand new stadium. Which, people have gone there. I mean, it's a wonderful facility, but it certainly doesn't have the history of the house that Ruth built.
Right. Also, I happened to be passing through Chicago on my Topps baseball trip to the Midwest League one year, and it was the first year that the White Sox were playing in their new stadium, which is kind of cookie cutter, if you will,
right.
Of all the newest stadiums. It doesn't have much of a personality, but when I visited the park, the old park, Comiskey, was still standing. It was right.
It was next door, I think.
Yeah, in the parking lot. I think it's gone now.
Right.
But so I never got to see a game in the old Comiskey Park. But I got to see the two parks, and although I don't have a picture of that, I have a vivid memory in my head, and I guess that's what's important. Well,
I have on our website a photograph from 1946 when my dad was playing with the Indians of Comiskey Park in its original condition. The exterior was red brick, and then when Bill Veeck took over the ownership of the White Sox, he had the exterior painted white. But Comiskey Park had a lot of great history, and one of my very good friends was Jeff Torberg, and Jeff was manager of the White Sox at Comiskey Park, and Jeff and I were Rutgers fraternity brothers and have known each other for 50 years. And Jeff told me, he said, I really enjoyed managing the White Sox and managing in Comiskey Park because of all the history and the fact it was just again one of the original baseball cathedrals.
Right, and something about you go into a ballpark that is a cathedral. One of I can remember going into the Polo Grounds. A fan feels a special feeling going in.
Right.
I'm sure it's the same, and I don't know anymore if it is because players today with the international flavor and just the apathy of folks about history of any kind. I mean, it's like we're all first generation. Who cares what happened before? And I'm not just talking about baseball and that kind of thinking in the world. It may not be the same, but back then, I'm sure for the player, you go into Yankee Stadium. Did your dad ever have any feelings about going into Yankee Stadium?
Absolutely. I have some photographs of my dad playing at Yankees. Matter of fact, I have a photograph of my dad stealing second base at Yankee Stadium, and Babe Dahlgren, who took Lou Gehrig's place, is the Yankee first baseman. I mean, I can tell you for a fact that players did feel special, feeling when they went into a place like Yankee Stadium to play. It was a great honor. A few years ago, I went to a ball game at Fenway Park, and I personally had a great thrill because I'm looking out at Fenway Park, and I'm saying, my gosh, my dad played in this very field, and the fact is that many people, I agree with you about history. I happen to love history, but a lot of people, they look at it and say, well, that was yesterday, and we're only concerned about today. Well, my personal feeling about the world situation, everything, is that you have to understand and have a knowledge of history so you don't have repeating of many of the mistakes that happened.
Right, and they say baseball is a microcosm of life. I think it's the other way around, but that's the way it is with folks and history, baseball history. To know American history, you really have to know baseball history. And the continuity, like your dad played with Babe Dahlgren, basically took over for Lou Gehrig.
Right.
Played with Babe Ruth. The continuity.
Well, one thing, Ralph, it's a little bit maybe different for me because I had personal experience, but I know one of my earliest memories as a little boy, my dad showing me what he called his Lou Gehrig scar. I mean, I didn't know really that much about Lou Gehrig. Obviously, I do now as an adult, but I remember him showing me on his leg. He said, Georgie, he said, here's my Lou Gehrig scar. And what happened was in 1938, my dad was tried to be picked off by the Yankees and an errant throw, and Gehrig went up and came down on my dad's leg and cut his leg. Well, my father and Lou Gehrig were very good friends and played against one another, but I thought that was a unique experience. And when I talk about Lou Gehrig, I talk about him from a personal experience. And just like, I met Feller and I met, Killebrew and I met Ted Williams and Jesse Owens. I mean, I had a wonderful experience because I personally, knew these. These weren't historical figures. These were personal figures in my life.
George, you mentioned that you played for your dad at Rutgers.
Right.
What was your career like? How did it stop at Rutgers? Did you go on to the minors?
Well, it did. A little bit about, I've never been that comfortable in talking about myself, but I happened to be someone who had some pretty good skill, and it was inherited. And I started to play, baseball in Little League. I can remember falling asleep in my first baseball uniform. I was so excited to have a uniform just like my father, and then played in Babe Ruth League and high school, American Legion, and then in college I had started to go to Rutgers games with my dad when he was coaching, and I knew a lot of the administrators and coaches, and from the time I was about 10 or 11 years old. So my freshman year, freshmen were not allowed to play varsity baseball. I happened to play freshman baseball, and I played for a gentleman named Al Sabo, who I didn't know at the time, but had been a teammate with my father in Trenton, New Jersey in the minor leagues. But then when I got to my sophomore year, I was going to play for my dad. My biggest decision was, what am I going to call him? Am I call him Coach or am I call him Pop? And so I decided, well, he's my father. I'm going to call him Pop. A lot of my teammates, they would kid me. They say, hey, what are you going to call your old man? I said, well, I'm going to call him Pop because that's what he is. But, I had
hear the Ron Rabinowvitz laugh.
Right. Yes, that's me. Hi, Ralph. Hi, George.
Hi.
How are you,
good to hear
sir?
from you, Ron.
Good. Good to hear from you guys.
Good.
You call him Pop, huh?
Yeah, give us a break in our voice, Ron. We're talking about retired numbers and why Washington isn't honored in Minnesota, why some of their players, even the ones with no numbers, such as Walter Johnson, are not honored. And George and George kind of likes my idea of trying to put it together where the Twins honor some of the senators and retire their numbers or honor them on
I
the
think
wall.
it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. I think
Thank
the
you.
only
You
one
have some in with the Twins.
Yeah.
Maybe we can give that some publicity and work with them. And
I'll see what I can do with that. Yeah.
Okay, but
I'll see what I can do with it. I think Harmon Killebrew is the only one that's retired from the Twins.
Right,
but
they don't make any
played for the
mention.
Senator. No, they don't mention. Right. Yeah.
Ron, give us a break a little bit because we've been chatting, and tell us about the thrill of when it was that they retired Jackie Robin. I think it was 1999.
97.
Okay. They retired Jackie's number in every ballpark in the country. Now, how did that come about? What you've made your life you're writing books and lecturing and keeping the legacy of Jackie Roosevelt Robinson alive.
Yeah.
How did it come to be that baseball did this wonderful thing and retired his number in all the stadiums? What did you play a role in that?
I didn't. I think Rachel had a big role in it, Jackie's widow. And she and Bud Selig were very close. And Bud Selig had a love for Jackie, and not only for him as a person, but for what he did for baseball and how he changed America. They say Babe Ruth changed baseball. Jackie Robinson changed America. And he did it alone. So the Dodgers retired, the first three numbers that the Dodgers retired was Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, and Sandy Koufax. Those were the first three. And that was in 97 also. And then that same year, Major League Baseball announced that they were going to retire Jackie Robinson's number 42 from every team in the major leagues. Now, there were a few ball players that were grandfathered in who were allowed to wear the number until they retired. One I can think of was Mo Vaughn, and the other one, of course, was Mariano Rivera. So after Mariano Rivera retired, no ball player would ever wear number 42 again, except all players, umpires, and coaches, managers, wear number 42 on April 15th, which is Jackie Robinson Day. So that was a very, very exciting thing. It was the only ball player that that they retired his number from every single team, which was a tremendous thing and a tremendous honor and well deserved, certainly. So Rachel came.
Has there ever been any confusion with that when every ball player is wearing 42? Any stories of confusion that over the years, or, I don't even know, people batting out of order, whatever, that you guys can think of?
I haven't seen anything like that. I remember the first year, it was Ken Griffey Jr. that contacted Bud Selig and said, on April 15th, that's Jackie Robinson Day. And I think it would be an honor if I and others would wear number 42. And he agreed. So he was the one that got this whole thing rolling as far as wearing the number. And that year, the Dodgers, every ball player was wearing number 42. I'm watching the game on TV. It was so funny. And now up to bat is number 42. And now up to bat is number 42. Everybody was 42, And then there were a few other ball players, African Americans especially, that decided to do that. And all of a sudden, every team, every player, manager, coach, and umpire all wear number 42. So it started out slowly, but then it really came to life, and every ball player was wearing number 42, which was a great honor.
I have a good way to wrap up this show. Let's talk about Bob Allison, the only one, you mentioned the only one that played for Washington that has his number retired. George, start with you. You mentioned just a few moments ago that you met him. And did I say Bob Allison? I meant Harmon Killebrew.
Harmon Killebrew, right.
Yes. Well, I can tell you one thing, Ralph and Ron, an interesting story about Harmon Killebrew. In 2001, we were developing a symposium at Howard University Hospital. It was called the Legacy of Griffith Stadium, and my responsibility was to contact some of the former players, announcers, and so forth who had a familiarity with Washington and Griffith Stadium. And I happened to call Harmon Killebrew on the phone. Harmon was living in Florida. Introduced myself. I said, Harmon, I'm George Case's son. He said, George Case's son? He said, how you doing? He said, I remember your dad when I was playing with the Twins. Your father was the third base coach, and we had a nice conversation about baseball. But Harmon was just a wonderful gentleman, great guy. And then, a few months later, 9/11 happened, and the airports in Washington were closed, and Harmon could not get in. Well, he personally called me on the phone to apologize for not being able to make, the symposium. And I thought to myself, I said, my gosh, I mean, he didn't have to do that. I realized the situation and as horrible as it was, and I didn't even expect to have Harmon, make it in. But the fact that he called me personally to explain why he couldn't be there, I just thought that said so much about his character.
Nice.
Isn't that
Ronnie,
something?
any memories in your head about Harmon Killebrew?
Oh, he was tremendous. What a ball player. He was terrific. I just saw a list here of, if we have a couple minutes, I can tell you a little bit. The Minnesota Twins have a long organizational history. In the last couple of years, they've fallen on some hard times, but they have had a long history. And with some great ball players. However, they were in 3 World Series. They've been in the playoffs 11 times since they've been in Minnesota. So they compiled a list of the best all-time Minnesota Twin roster, of 25-man roster. And it's kind of interesting, and I suppose anybody can argue who should be on that list and who not. But this is who they came up with. The catcher is Joe Mauer. First base is Harmon Killebrew. Second base, Rod Carew. Third base, Gary Gaetti. Shortstop, Roy Smalley. Outfield was Puckett, Oliva, and Allison. And then the bench was Earl Batty, Ken Herbeck, Chuck Knobloch, Corey Koski, Roy Versailles, Torrey Hunter, Cesar Tovar. Starting pitchers
who played in all 9 positions, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
I'm big on versatility, and he certainly has.
Right. That's right. And then the starting pitchers were Bert Blyleven, Brad Radke, Santana, Jim Cott, Frank Viola, and the closer was Joe Nathan, and the bullpen was Rick Aguilera, Eddie Gardardo, and Al Worthington. So that's how they came up with a 25-man roster of all-time Minnesota team players.
Not a bad. That is a roster. Like if you could play simulation baseball, which I play a lot of, and you can compile those, you get those guys, and you get the all-stars of every franchise. Given that it is such a new franchise, that's one hell of a roster.
That is. It really is.
From top,
it really is.
Very well balanced in terms of. I don't know if Earl Batty would be the second catcher if you had to make a team to play with, but that's not a bad second string catcher.
Not a bad. Yeah. There was
Bauer had a string of some really good years, and he's still with them, if I'm not mistaken.
Who's that?
Or is Mauer somewhere else?
Oh, Mauer's still with him, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think he's catching so much anymore. He's been playing first base, but he's still with the team. Yeah.
Right.
And quite a few of those ball players are in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. Blyleven recently made it, and I will say 2 things. Blyleven and before him, Camilo Pascual.
Right.
With the Washington Senators. I don't think he played it all with Minnesota.
Yes, he did. He did.
He did?
He did. Oh, yeah.
Someday we're going to have to talk about the players that played with both franchises.
Right. That would be interesting.
Across the line. But those 2 guys, and I don't know if Pascual had anything to do with teaching Blyleven, but they had Sandy Koufax type curveballs that would go from 12 to 6, and you don't see that much anymore.
No, you don't.
Pascual probably had one of the finest curveballs in Major League Baseball history. Terrific pitcher.
Right, as did Blyleven.
Absolutely.
And other good pitchers with Washington, like I say, Pedro Ramos was decent. Another guy I'd like to get as a guest because he wrote a foreword to Mark Littell's book, Mark's been a guest on these airways many times. This is Whitey Herzog. And Whitey played with the old Washington Senators after he left the Yankees and went on to be a great manager. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's in the Hall of Fame himself. So maybe we get him as a guest sometime, and we'll talk about his memories of Washington. And also, I'd like to, in near future shows, like to talk about what the Twins are up to now. We got spring training coming on. What's in store? We'll do a show next week, and we'll try to keep up with what's going on. So the show is in reality Senators Twins past, present, and future. So we'll try to follow some of the kids in the minors that are coming up, and maybe get some coaches and some minor league instructors on, and we'll make this as good a show as we possibly can. And I'm appreciative that you guys are in for it and are enjoying it. You seem to enjoy yourself today, George.
Very much so. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, me
Good.
too. It's great. You know, I came up with one other little thing that was kind of interesting. You know, major league players can be you're a superstitious bunch, having different pregame rituals that they must adhere to. But the Minnesota Twins reliever, Ryan O'Rourke, might be taking it a little too far. You know, some baseball players need to eat a certain meal before a game, like Wade Boggs and his fried chicken. Others need to show up at a certain time, take a specific number of swings in the cage, or throw the exact number of warm-up pitches. There are a lot of little rituals that Major League Baseball players have that make up the game. And yet, Minnesota Twins reliever Ryan O'Rourke may be taking it a bit too far. See, before virtually every game he appears in, O'Rourke vomits. Yes, he throws up prior to his appearance on the mound, making any gum he may be chewing all the more important. In his case, it is a matter of nervous energy, which gets him so wound up that he makes himself sick. Can you imagine?
Oh. Reminds me of Bill Russell.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Russell used.
I came up with that.
And I just thought of Bill Russell and his illustrious coach, Arnold Red Auerbach, has an awful lot of had, the rest of his soul, awful lot of ties to Washington and some of the schools you were mentioning, Howard. I remember reading a book about him in his later years, and he'd have these breakfasts in Washington, and he was big for the community. And I don't know if you guys have any memories of him in the baseball, if they honored him.
Well, you know what? I'm not sure, Ralph, what the relationship was, but I do know that Red Auerbach had I think it was his brother, who was either a sports writer or someone with an athletic background in D.C. People have mentioned that to me. So I didn't obviously know Red Auerbach. I know some of the players who played for him, but the fact that there was a connection of the Auerbach name to Washington D.C. baseball history.
Oh,
beautiful.
We
got that. We'll find out more about that. The idea of this show really excites me because we're uncovering some history that goes unnoticed by the baseball world.
Right. Absolutely.
For a number of reasons. And boy, this has been a great one. We'll do it again, same time, same place next weekend if we can.
Wonderful.
Enjoyed it. Thank you both.
George,
thank
it was
you
great
guys,
talking to you.
And to all of you out there, I'm just going to end it by saying, keep on keeping on. These are tough times, but we've had tough times before, and we'll have them again. And that's what the fiber of this country is change and adversity. And
right.
We'll get through it, whatever it is. That's what we're made up of. We're survivors. And so thank you again, gentlemen, and we'll be back next week. This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. I'm Ralph Tyko, the host and co-host. In no particular order are Ron Rabinowvitz and Rabinowvitz, excuse me. And believe me, that's not easy for me because on my network we have Ian Kahanowitz. You're a Rabinowvitz. I was a Tykocinski. Right. George, we're going to have to tack some numbers, some vowels onto that name of yours if you're going to fit in.
I got a very short one. People say to me, they say, "How do you spell it?" I said, "Just like you spell K-C-A-S-E."
Very good.
Cute. Very cute.
All right, guys. Thank you again. We'll see you next week, and keep them going. everybody
Look
out
forward
there,
to it.
thank you for
Thank you.
listening.
Bye to both of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.